Joe, would you kick us off by just describing Twin Peaks Classical Academy? What is it?
Yeah, Twin Peaks Classical Academy, located in Longmont, Colorado. We're the oldest charter school in the St. Vrain Valley School District, our authorizers. We're in our 27th year, and we're actually in our second building, so we've had a pretty good long history with some turbulence in between, but we're poised for even bigger and greater things in a very competitive market. And I'll just say, I think this is an important message for all charter schools to hear, but all schools across the country. There is a demographic shift. It is real. There are fewer students, and we're going to have to be a lot better at competing against other schools, school districts, and charter schools to capture those students.
When you all think about the time that you were thinking about that you needed to bring in aligned influence, you need to think about doing governance better than you were doing. What was going on? Why were you incented to bring in aligned influence?
So a previous board president, Regina Casey, brought you guys in about 4 years ago. And what had been going on specifically to Twin Peaks, but I think is probably happens to every organization that has a board and an executive. When an organization begins, the board is running the project because that's just how it is. It's small, it's nimble, it's lean. But there should be a time when a board hires a trusted executive to take over the day-to-day running the operations while the board looks outward. Twin Peaks never had that transition. So when I came on 8 years ago, there were still founding board members on the board, and the majority of the board was used to running the school and telling the executive what to do rather than empowering the executive to do his job.
Yeah. So when you think of the board, Matt, I know you weren't here at that point in time, which is, I think, is an incredibly good story of you're the second or I think you're the third board chair since Aligned Influences got here, and that I think we take a step up each time rather than it being a challenge. So when you think about, either of you, when you think about what the board would say its challenges were at that time, what would you think?
8 years ago, I do think the board realized they needed to hire a true executive. At that point in time, the school was less than 20 years old, and they had never hired a true director of schools. They had a split model with a secondary principal and an elementary principal. And because the board was doing the executive's job, and they did reach a point where we need to hire an executive to run the whole organization. So I give them a lot of points for that. How they came to that, I'm not too sure because I was hired in that process, but I do know they spent well over a year looking for the right person for the job. I believe I was the third candidate that actually made it to the board hiring process. So they did realize we need to hire a true executive to run the organization rather than the board trying to do it and telling two principals how to do things.
Yeah, and I think then I think you'd agree with this, Matt, then when you do that and you hire a real executive, now the board has to figure out what does it mean to be a real board, right?
Yes.
If you spoke to that, Matt, and said, what you've learned about, you think the school has learned about the board being a real board, what would you say?
Understanding what our role is, understanding what the delineation is between the director and what the board does. And quite frankly, the direct, protect, and enable that you made very clear helps delineate and keep us in our swim lane, so to speak. So direct, protect, enable. The protect and enable part is really important. And if we have a good executive, they basically do operations, and there's not a lot of directing, there's a lot of governance. And so it should be a fairly harmonious relationship, and here it is. I think we're also lucky because we have a director that tends to really focus on the operations and the leadership, and if it's working well, it should be a little boring for the board members, and that's what we want. We want it to be smooth running as long as we all know what our boundaries are, and that direct, protect, enable allows us to look outward, like Joe said.
Yeah, because I think what I hear you saying is that for the board to really drop back into direct, protect, and enable, that you have to trust that you have an executive director that can really lead, manage, and accomplish, and that's what's really happened here at Twin Peaks, is that you have both of those. You have the executive director who really has a history of a track record of being a great leader, manager, and accomplisher, which has allowed you, the board, to take time to invest in yourselves and figure out what your role should be alongside that.
Exactly, and you have to step back and you have to have trust in the director and his abilities, and trust that his staff that he's put together are going to be focused on the mission and the objective of that school. And here we have a very clear objective with a classical education, and that's what we see happening here. And so the board can focus on governance and making sure that we have a policy and a plan that continues to be clear, not ambiguous, so we can continue to reach those objectives of the school, which when I came on board, we had a very good system that you guys put together. And in that Bible that Joe will talk about, I call it the Bible, but it's the governance manual and the policies and the calendar. It makes it very easy for a board member to understand what we need to do and how we need to do it. And I think it's very important that board members understand what their role is, and there has to be some delineation between those roles. And I don't want to direct him. I don't want to tell him what to do. I want to help him.
Yeah, that's great. So looking back, maybe just another layer of detail below of what wasn't working between the executive role and the board role. If you went down one more layer below that, the board needed to hire an executive, they did that, and then they had to learn their roles. If you went one more layer below that of what wasn't working, what are some of the things that you'd say?
Well, I mean, you can, and probably every school has their own examples of what's not working right now or what was not working in the past, but it was one thing to say, hire an executive to run the school. It was another thing for the board to actually do it. So to give you some context, like right now, we have one board meeting a month, which includes our finance study session, and we have two other committees, accountability and community development. Those meetings are about an hour and a half each. About 4.5 hour meetings, and then the board chair and the vice president and myself, we meet weekly, and I call him a lot. I mean, I'm in constant communication with the board president. When I walked in, and this will tell you how the board was still running the school. We did 2 meetings a month. They lasted 4 to 5 hours each, and we had more committees than I can remember. We probably had 7 or 8 subcommittees that all had a very heavy board presence as well. Technology committee, curriculum committee, uniform committees. We just had committees everywhere, and I bet board members were spending 15 to 20 hours a month in meetings doing administrivia and not thinking about looking outward. And while that was happening, while it was at its nadir, while it was at its worst point, our enrollment was cratering. So I mean, if that system was working, then keep using the system. But at that same time, our enrollment went from a high of over 1,000 students all the way down to 720. So too many cooks were in the kitchen.
And quite frankly, we have a well-oiled machine now. We don't need to be discussing the operations in terms of how he's laying things out. That's his job, to lay things out and get the operations working, and they've done a great job. We just, since I've been here, we have 100 more students than we started when I was on the board. So they're doing something right, and it's very autonomous in terms of their operations. And if there's issues or things that we see from a governance perspective, because we have such a great relationship, since it's working so well, we can solve those problems quickly or have a discussion about how things are working, and usually it's a very smooth process. So we don't have long meetings. The last meeting was 58 minutes. I kept track, and then the finance is usually half hour, and sometimes you have to have longer meetings when you're dealing with other topics like approving a budget. But for the most part, we get through the business, we discuss what we need to get done, and then we move on so he can focus on his staff and his mission, and we can do our part by making sure that the governance and the direction is being accomplished.
Yeah, that's great. So when you started this, when you were deciding to invest in the board's ability to govern, because you understood now that you have an executive that is really able to lead, manage, and accomplish this, was there any hesitancy to invest in that? What did you have to overcome? What did you have to overcome on the board? What did you have to overcome in the executive team to invest in that, to go forward with it?
Probably every school, and it's funny, if you go on their websites, I challenge you to find them. Every school should have on their website or school district, what is their governance policy? Where is their policy manual? Where is the big picture things of how the school runs? You won't find many if you go to a lot of school websites, by the way. I think the biggest obstacle, I'm not even going to call it an obstacle, a lot of work was redesigning various things of paper we had all around and putting into a comprehensive, we have a governance manual and we have a policy manual. And that clearly delineates the board's role and the executive director's role. And it doesn't mean it won't change and it can't change and there still isn't tension sometimes, but we have a guidebook to go to and go, well, what did we say when we started this 4 years ago? And what did we say last year and what did we say now? And we have a frame of reference to go to. And sometimes there's some natural tension. I'm not even going to call it bad. There's natural tension, but let's go to the policy and the governance manual and what does that say? Instead of thinking off of the top of our heads what I think should happen now.
And that makes it easy as a board member. I mean, it's walking in here and having everything laid out in a binder given to the board members. I tell the board members all the time, what does the book say? What's the policy? What's the guidance? And so it's not ambiguous. And there might be gray areas that we work out, and we're still filling in some of the bubbles as we find them, or the gaps. But for the most part, we have a framework that we can work from, and it makes it very easy as a board member.
I think a framework is a great word. It fills in. Joe, you talked about this being just a lot of hard work. And so one of the hesitancies that some people have is, I just don't want to deal with that. I just don't want to do all that hard work. What was your experience working with Aligned Influence? How did that hard work become, did it make it easier? That hard work? Did it?
Oh, in the long run, of course it made it easier. I mean, well, and I think this was a key point for, the board's turnover, and this was a key point for our current president, Matt, to hear, and even newer board members, that I did not hire Aligned Influence. The board hires Aligned Influence. And once the board wrapped their brains around that, and now I'm going to make sure every year in onboarding I remind them of that relationship, I think that helps do the hard work. Because I think, Matt, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think some board members, especially newer board members last year, were kind of like, well, I don't know if I want to bring Ken back because he's just Joe's guy. And he's just, running interference for us. I felt that was an epiphany for you.
It was, and that's another piece of being a board member, is understanding the process and understanding what the previous board members did and why. We didn't really have a lot of continuity when I joined in terms of what was happening. And so Joe educated me and explained the process, and I think it's great. And I think Joe will tell you that he wasn't a real fan initially of the concept, and now he's a believer because of how much it has smoothed out the process between the board and what he does from the operational standpoint. I call it the operational standpoint. And so there's a lot of value in it, and it's made my job really easy. And I think it's a valuable thing for anybody.
you've talked about those two sets of three words: direct, protect, enable for the board, and lead, manage, and accomplish for the executive, and how that has that Matt, you talked about how that's been really helpful to frame your role. I'd just like you to go just a little bit deeper on those three things for both of you. Joe, when you think about the three words lead, manage, and accomplish, how's it helped you to think about what your role is and how you play that role in relationship to the board? And Matt, the same thing. When you think about your three words of direct, protect, and enable, how's that helped you think about your role, the board's role, and its relationship to the executive? Whoever wants to go.
Well, I think, again, it's natural tension, and I think this is a learning process for new board members when they come on, and these are unpaid volunteer positions, and I do think some board members get into a trap of, I need to know everything that's going on at the school. That is impossible. I barely know anything that's going on at the school, and it's my full-time job. It's hard for me to know everything. We have a preschool to a high school. There's a lot happening. I have 91 adult employees, almost 950 kids. I don't know everything that's going on. And so when I think about my reference of lead, manage, and accomplish, I do a lot of little things all the time. And so does my team, my leadership team, and the teachers, and all of the employees. We're all doing a bunch of little things all of the time. And there's no way I can keep the board appraised of everything that is happening in the school. And I do think that's a learning curve for board members to I think sometimes it's even peer pressure from other parents. Well, you're the president of the board. You should know everything that's going on. I mean, so in one of my onboardings, I love to give them the phrase, I don't know is an honest answer many times, which doesn't mean you can't find out, but it's okay to say, I don't know. Or even beyond I don't know, you don't want to sound too flippant, but I don't care. I have people that take care of that for me. I'll know if it's not working because we're leading, managing, and accomplishing all the way down. I know when things aren't working, and then we deal with that. But there's a lot of details I don't know.
And then there's my kids that'll say, well, Dad, you're the board president, don't you know? And I'll say, no, that's not my swim lane. Go talk to your teacher.
So think about those three words: direct, protect, enable, and how they've informed your role and how your role relates to Joe's.
Well, the first thing is, as a board member, you have to separate. A lot of us are parents. You have to separate the parent from the board member.
Yeah.
And that is really hard for some board members. And Joe's seen that. I've seen that. It's been frustrating to try to get people to focus on the direct, protect, enable, to separate the parental concerns with your kid in a class or an issue. That's not board stuff. You got to put on your parent hat and then go take care of that independently, and that's hard for some people. That's why I told my son, that's not my swim lane. That's go talk to the teachers. That's not what I do as a board member. But the direct, protect, enable, that's the governance piece, making sure that we're accomplishing what we're supposed to do in that manual. Protect is the school. You have to have a positive relationship. We talk about tension, but really, in my perspective, I don't have any tension with the staff because I have complete trust in that piece, and that's why I protect them and help them and support them whenever something happens or comes up. Not happens negatively, but if there's something that pops up that we need to address, it's a very good relationship. And then the enable is give them the tools to be successful. And we talk about looking outward. That's something that we haven't done enough of, and I think a lot of boards don't, and we're going to work on that this year. How do you look outward? Just motivating people to spread the word and then work with the community. And I think we're doing a little bit better with that, but that's one aspect that is really important as a board member to understand. So there's a clear delineation, and I think a lot of people really have a hard time understanding what their role is. I did when I first came on as a board member, but your direction and that delineation helped us understand and get people focused and off of the emotional drama of being a parent and focus on the business of the board, try to keep those two separated, and it's really been good for us.
I think all schools, all school boards, whether they're private or public or charter, have this issue you talked about of board members understanding the difference between their role as a parent and their role as a board member. And I think that's even, I would argue that's even more critical or more present in charter schools, because often there's this sense that the parents are much more involved in the charter school. What would you say to a new board member, or to somebody that's thinking about, a parent that's thinking about sending their kid to a charter school, and the role of the board versus the role of the parent you have?
If I'm talking to another parent, I try to sell the school all the time. Not all charter schools are the same, because sometimes they have a different focus, but so they're not all created equal. This one has a very pragmatic focus on a classical education, and so if I understand your question correctly, I'll sell the school and why it's important, and if we have parents that are interested in the board, I try to explain to them what our purpose is, why we're here. A lot of times, like Joe said, we'll get a parent that says, hey, you're a board member, what are you going to do about this problem? And I have to direct them, that's not a board issue. Here's what we do, and here's why it's important. That particular issue, I can talk to a staff, or you can talk to a staff member about, and get that resolved separately. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great.
Well, and I want to go back to something you said a little earlier, and I really want to focus in on that word accomplish, because I think our board is very close to there. That's a big word, and if you have a very well done executive director evaluation process, then that also gives the board freedom to pay attention to the big picture and the accomplishments. We have a $14 million budget at our school. It's easy to get fixated on what do you mean you spent $7,000 on paint for this project? Because that could sound like a big number in a vacuum. It could, what do you mean you did that? I'll use a perfect example, one that one board member did bring up last year. What do you mean you're going to spend $5,000 on hotel rooms for a leadership summit? Oh, that's a big number. I'm not saying it's not, but in the context of a $14 million budget and a 3-day leadership retreat with 9 members of the leadership team, that's very minor. And the accomplishment that I'm measured by with the budget is very specific line items within those, not to exceed, and the board knows when I exceed a line item, but the bottom end. And so at the end of last year, at this audit, we're going to bring in about an $800,000 surplus. That's the number to focus on, because that's the accomplishment, not all the little things that get done on the way.
That's great. So what were surprises? What surprised you about this? What surprised you about, surprises you now about when you think back 8 years, or when you think back about what's done? What surprised you about the work with Aligned Influence and the work of improving governance? Anything?
Well, I'll say, and I know you're going to, if you don't talk about it, you should, Matt. The role of the president and the rest of the board has to be very attentive in the role of the president. I say in my onboarding, I do not hold the board accountable. The board needs to hold each other accountable, and I think that's one of the main responsibilities that gets overlooked, and it has been multiple times since I've been here. The rest of the board members are not paying attention to what the chair is doing, because the chair sets the agenda. The chair does a lot of things, and that's, I think we're well on the way to even managing that better. But
that's a great surprise.
Well, Joe hit on a very good point. So I think we all got sucked into that a little bit last year, looking at some of the micro pieces of the puzzle, not looking at the big picture. And that was a big learning point. And the chair does need to focus everybody on the objective, mentor people about where to get answers about the budget, instead of coming at it as kind of an adversarial perspective on the budget. Why did you spend $5,000 on this line item? How about let's get everybody into the financial meetings that we have weekly or monthly and educate everybody on the process so the board members understand. So that's what we do now. We start before the board meeting, everybody comes in and Joe briefs everybody on the budget, and there's no surprises. So, and another thing, as a chair, you need to share information with your board members, and that wasn't happening, in the past. So whatever we talk about in a meeting, Monday morning meeting, or anything that pertains to the board of the school, spend the time to email the rest of the board members and say, here's what we talked about, here's what's happening. And so there's no surprises. Everybody has information. The chain of command's working, and there's no ambiguous aspects of what's happening in the school. The board members have to understand what's happening top to bottom in terms of other board members having discussions about board-related things. And that didn't happen in the past, and it makes it a lot smoother, more comfortable, and less questions to Joe about the little things and more big picture, if that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And in fact, if I were to reframe what Joe said and connect it to what you just said, is that a big surprise is not only is there a chain of command on the executive side, but there's a chain of command on the board side, and the board has a responsibility for making sure that chain of command that the board is focusing on what the board should be focusing on, because many times it has to be the executive that's doing that rather than the board chair keeping the board doing what it's supposed to be doing.
And there's another piece. Joe's seen a lot of board members. Joe has had to deal with that for years in his career. And so as somebody who's never been on a board for the school before, I don't know what I don't know. And so in order to have a good relationship between the director and the board members, sometimes it's important for Joe to say, hey, there's a little bit of give and take, a little bit of mentoring. And he's obviously got to be careful about his boundaries and ours, but really it's important that the director also helps the board members understand what their role is too. And Joe does a really good job with that. I don't know how other directors do it, but, and again, this document helps with that delineation. But some board members just don't know what they don't know, and it takes a while to figure out how to be a good board member, but this makes it easier, and it speeds up that process significantly by giving us swim lanes.
Well, and it's what surprises. I was part of the problem in this transition and in this journey. Board meeting, board communication, sidebars, weird topics come up, and all of a sudden you're talking about striping the parking lot in a board meeting. And because I am who I am, I would engage in some of those debates. So I had to teach myself to get better at, when a random topic comes up in a board meeting, having the discipline to say, I'm not prepared to discuss that. If you want it on the agenda next board meeting, I can bring in the right people and do a real presentation instead of us having a debate at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night when we're all tired. So I've had to train myself to do that as well.
That agenda's keeping the board on what they should be getting
Yes.
on.
And that's something that I've been proving myself this year to help Joe out, keeps the frustration and the meetings tracking appropriately per the agenda. So now I'm trying to, if I have any input from the board members, we deal with things like that offline. They can go talk to Joe. Hey, tell me about the parking lot. I'm just curious. And so that's how we should handle some of those operational questions instead of making concerns or potential grievances about how something might work in a board meeting. And so that's important that the chair make sure that the other board members understand, that's kind of an offline thing. Just go ask Joe and he can give you some clarification. Or he can put that on the agenda and have somebody come in and talk about that particular topic to educate the board members.
Yes.
And that's the key, is we don't understand how all the operational things work. And sometimes as a parent, like, why does that drive line work that way? It's terrible. And then Joe will come in and put it on the agenda and say, here's the driveline history. It's 100% better than it was 3 years ago. We're limited by space. These are the things we've considered. And then the board members can feel at ease that particular piece of the operations is considered and working well. And they've been working on it over time. So that's kind of an example where the board members can cross the line and get involved with operations as opposed to just asking the director, how does this work, and educate us. So it's
educating the board rather than the board getting down into trying to make decisions.
Absolutely, and that's what we're trying to do this year is, educate, and it's okay to bring things up and ask questions, but we don't need to be telling Joe, hey, you need to, here's the printout that the board members want for you to change the drive line, because he's probably got a pretty good handle on that over time, because we're new board members, we show up and to the party, and he's already been dealing with this for how many years? 8 years. So that's an important piece of understanding your role as a board member.
Because it's a valid perception that, again, I'm getting better at it. You also don't want this wall of no communication or no information. It's just a balancing act, and I would rather provide more information, but I know it's got to be the right appropriate information, or it's too much and it'll all become white noise. But I know if I could see being a new board member having a perception that the executive director's like keeping stuff from me. I could see and understand that perception until they get a few years under their belt and a few cycles to, oh, he does talk about this in September. Oh, he does talk about this in October. So it takes a few cycles to go through that. But I think for executive directors out there, that's an honest perception, and how do you work through that perception without sounding defensive?
So now, 8 years later, in your role, or I think it's now 4 years, for 3 years that we've been doing this, 3 years, I guess, with Aligned Influence. What would you say have been the most positive benefits of working with Aligned Influence?
My prop that I brought, the creation of a very organized board manual. And it's not just our governance policy, and it's not just our policy manual, but it's our board calendar, it's our bylaws, our board members agreement, the strategic plan, the calendar. This is only year 3 that I've done it, but because we do revisions all the time. In our June retreat, every board member gets, here is this year's board manual. Bring it to every meeting, take notes in it, and have that handy as a reference, because I bring mine to every meeting, and have it there as a reference. And
what would you say? Yeah.
Oh, that's exactly right. That manual has helped guide us very clearly, and it's like I said, it made joining this board very easy. Open it up, and we have a very clear product that we can start from, a great outline. So, and then the direct, enable, protect, that piece really clarified our roles. And so it's been, I recognize that before, a couple years ago, things were more ambiguous, and then they worked really hard with you to create this document. A lot of work was put into that, and I think that the charter schools that can put in that effort and that time to create this outline, that's going to pay off. And I think you'll agree that it's paid off considerably. Yeah. For the way the school operates. He can focus on his piece, and we can focus on ours, and I think that's the key, is putting that hard work in to get that developed, and then it's more smooth sailing from there.
Well, I think that leads to another question. How has this helped you be more successful as a board? How has this helped you be more successful as an executive director?
I'll go first. Well, if you're not spending 20 hours a month in meetings and committees and board meetings, you have more time to think about what your job is. And if the root job in a school is teaching kids how to read, write, and do math, I mean, I have to remind myself that is my main job here, preschool through kindergarten. But if you're balancing, and at some points in time, I would argue we had a dysfunctional board, or a board in conflict with me. If I'm in conflict with my board, or if the board's dysfunctional, I'm not focused on what I'm supposed to be doing. Any executive director only has so much bandwidth. And if he's focused on, I'm gonna lose my job, this board member's bugging me, that board member's bugging me, I gotta get this done because I know it's important to them, then you're not on your core mission. And if you're not on your core mission, you're not gonna be in business.
So how has this helped you be on your core mission? I mean, how has this helped keep the board being complementary to you
The
rather
big
than.
one is time. The number one is time, but number two, it's conflict mediation, conflict management. It's
Well, let's take a look at this. So our next board meeting, it's kind of like the agenda's already set. So there might be something that pops up, but I can look, here's the September board meeting. We have an 80% solution here. We can throw in some other things to improvise or discuss, but for the most part, it's here. And the proof's in the pudding. I've been in other organizations where we have tons of meetings and the product's very bland. So let's compare and contrast. My goal this year is to leave him alone as much as possible, to make our meetings short and concise. If something comes up, we deal with it together. And if we have to get the board involved, we'll deal. If it's a board level thing, we'll deal with it together and then move on. And so let's compare and contrast. We had a 58-minute meeting the other night, and we have 100 more students this year than we did when I started this school. We have we have the top scores in the state. We're outperforming all the schools in St. Vrain, or many of the schools in St. Vrain in terms of some of these scores. So the proof's in the product, and so what am I supposed to do? I don't need to interfere with what he's doing because it's clearly working, and this is clearly working. So it's important that people understand that if you have a good director and you trust them, and the product is improving every year, and the kids are happy, the families are happy, people are coming here, especially in a district where people are leaving charter schools, and we're gaining. So you don't need to make it hard.
So let me poke into that for just a second. Some board member, some other board could hear, well, you're leaving Joe alone. You're not doing anything. You're just coming. So the board's just a rubber stamp. You're not really being the board. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that this particular outline talks about the pieces, the monitoring responsibilities. It says board responsibilities and monitoring responsibilities. Financial conditions and activities. We look at the finances, what he briefs us on what's happening, and if it makes sense and the product is working, then why do we need to get involved? But as a board, we are monitoring these things. We are reviewing the policies. We have a few policy changes or a few things we found that we want to make less ambiguous. We're going to tackle that this year. So we're still improving the outline, the framework, and we're monitoring per the governance manual. But if that's all working smoothly, and if there is road bumps, the monitoring process, we work out the issue or the thing that might have dropped off the radar, and then we move forward. So we're active, but if it's working well, it shouldn't be laborious.
Well, and I think this current board and Matt and Devin specifically are ready to take the next logical step, which is get the board to be more outward looking than inward looking. Because if they don't have any board, if they do not have an outward vision, it's easy to look inward. And then it's easy to talk about the snowplow. That's easy to talk about. You know what's hard to talk about? Community events, community engagement, other things that take a lot more work and effort. And I'm going to use my analogy that I shared with the board that I think is a perfect example for educators. When I started 30 years ago, assistant principals had one job in education, and they did discipline. Mean old Mr. Messling did discipline. The day he walked in the minute to the minute he left, and that's all he did. And some assistant principals love just doing discipline because it's easy. We made a shift in education decades ago. I want an educational leader that can do discipline, but their focus needs to be on reading, writing, math, not disciplining Johnny. That transition in the last 2 decades has been a difficult one in education because some assistant principals just want to do discipline because it's easy. What's hard is being an instructional leader and going in and helping a new teacher become a better teacher or a good teacher become an awesome teacher. It's the same dynamic with the board. If they're not looking outward and if they're not thinking big picture and the growth of the school and what's this place look like 10 years from now, Then we're going to talk about the parking lot, because that's easy.
And that goes to making sure we have a plan for the future. Joe's not going to be here forever. He's going to retire. And do we have a plan in place to make sure that we have an emergency backup plan, or we have somebody else who can pick up the proverbial football and run with it, so the operation continues to move forward? And so the board needs to be thinking about that, the future, hiring the follow-on, when that process is going to take place, which we've done recently, to make sure that we have continuity and we don't lose that relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Oftentimes I see in schools that they feel that they are successful because of who's the board chair right now.
No.
Or who's the executive director right now. How has this prepared you to be successful regardless of who sits in that chair, regardless of who sits in that chair?
I would take it from this perspective. It's up to us, the board, to hire the right individual to run this school in accordance with the objectives of the school. And so that's the hard piece from a board. The board has it's going to take a lot of work to hire the right executive to manage a school this size and to do it right. So that's the difficult part of a board, making that decision, because really that individual is going to be the one that's responsible for the success. And so kind of in the peripheral, we are too. So if that kind of, it's a little bit of a different angle. We're successful if we hire the right person. And then if we have issues, we're not following the objective, then we either, as a board, have to start directing, and then we have to start making sure we're following this. And if it's not in compliance, then we have to find a new director. If that makes sense. Is that the right angle?
No, it does. And I think what Aligned Influenced helped me do, I mean, I've always write things down, but I've even gotten better at writing things down for the future. If we're going to do something once, we're probably going to do it again next year. So my replacement's going to get a number of longitudinal plans that have been going back 10, 15 years, whether it's finance, strategic plan, enrollment. She's going to inherit a whole bunch of longitudinal plans, and what is included in that is a very solid onboarding of new board members. That was a stumbling block, but I think we're all in good consensus now that yes, the executive director has a role in the onboarding of new board members. And a previous president said, no, I'll do it, and things were missed.
So it's both, right?
Yes. So now I think we have a very clear consensus of the president is doing his role in onboarding new board members, but there's also an executive director class. And it's written down, and it's a couple hours. And she has that. And she'll add to it or delete or detract as the future goes, but do those things, roll them out systemically. We just went through the hiring process for my replacement. And because I was the first executive director that was hired 8 years ago, not much was left over. We had to kind of recreate the process. What did we do this time? There is now in the Googleator, the executive director hiring process. Mm-hmm. And everything that we came up with is chucked in that document and in that folder for the future. So it's being really smart instead of 5 years. Matt could be gone 5 years from now, and they're hiring a replacement. You know, whoever that board is and whoever that executive director and HR is, they're going to be able to go to that folder now. Executive director hiring process.
Do you think, back to that, do you think this process has made this a more attractive position for a new executive director?
Yes.
I think so.
Yes.
Do you think this process has made this a more attractive position to be the board, president of this board?
Oh, absolutely. I've been a part of many committees and boards, or not boards, but committees and other organizations where you spend a lot of time spinning your wheels at meetings, and it's nauseating. You know, it's just trying to get a bunch of humans to direct in the right direction, herding the cats, is very challenging. And here, I just have to do this. Well, what's the governance manual say? Or for the hiring process, we approved a process, what's the process say? Or if we have an outside person say, well, why is this person picked? Well, we followed the process, and the outcome of the process was this, and it was a public process that was approved. So absolutely, this is, and I tell all the board members, we're going to do this precisely and quickly and get back to our families, and so Joe can get back to running the show here, and that's key. And I don't want him to have to worry about the board. Again, if something comes up, then the board will get more involved and we'll work it out. But for the most part, it should just be keeping an eye on things and working towards the looking outward. And that's what I'm going to try to improve this year. I don't think we've done a very good job in the past of doing that, and that's what I can do as a board, is focus on that piece while he focuses inward.
So,
Well, and I'm going to add on to that. The first question that prospective board members ask are the time commitment. And they want to hear an honest answer. And I think an honest answer is when we're following the process, it's 8 to 10 hours a month. Mm-hmm. It's very doable. But without that process, I told you what it was like that I walked into and what I think it is at many schools. It's far longer. I mean, I'm going to use the state of Colorado as an example. Our authorizer, the St. Vrain Valley School District, very large school district, a $400 million budget. It's run effectively. Mm-hmm. Their board meetings are about an hour and a half long every other week. Our next door neighbors to the north and the south, 5 to 8 hour meetings. There's a difference between a well-run organization and a poorly run organization.
And again, if you compare the product, St. Vrain is one of the better school districts in the state. They have a great budget, managed well. They have great schools, great students that are learning. So again, they have an hour and a half meeting with what do you say, a $500 million budget?
Close to.
And they only have an hour and a half meeting because it's run so efficiently. The board members know what their role is, and they can get the business done efficiently, and it's the same thing here. So it's a really nice, comfortable place to be a board member.
So how do you think all of this has affected your competitiveness, your ability to attract students and attract parents and attract teachers and attract administrators, to attract board members? How has all this affected your competitiveness?
You know, this is the end of the first week of school this year, the 24-25 school year. And it's been, and I'm going to say this in my faculty and staff update this afternoon, you can tell we are hitting on all cylinders as an organization, because it has been a smooth week, but it's also been a wonderful week. We've been able to do culture building with students. We've been able to do a lot of things with students and teachers that set off the course for a good year. So when it's well run, and a well-run organization have happier people. Adults can walk into an organization and figure out pretty quickly, is this a happy ship or an unhappy ship? And it's pretty, and you know who figures it out first? Kids. And kids go home and talk to their parents. I mean, it's subconscious in a way, but it's noticeable, and it's easier to identify when things are unhappy than happy.
And this has made this a more happy place.
It's very.
I have 5 kids here, elementary, middle school, and high school. And I made a joke one night about let's move to Wyoming or Montana. All 5 of them said, no, I love my school and my teachers. And they weren't joking, they were very serious. And they love their school and their teachers because it's a comfortable environment and it's well run. And the piece that they like isn't the students. I mean, kids, they mention their teachers. And so that's why all of my kids are here and will stay here. And that's why we will not move, because we have a place where my children are safe and happy, and the teachers are happy, and there's just a good energy, and that comes from the top down.
So you'd say there's a connection between what we've been talking about governance and leadership and what happens in the
Yes.
classroom.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel it and see it here. I think if you have a board and a director that are always in conflict and there's a lot of drama, that spreads, that energy, that relationship spreads through the school and the staff, and there's tension. We saw that last year a little bit. There's a little bit of tension that didn't need to be there. And that trickles down. And so I think that, like you said, it's a well-run machine. All the cylinders are firing properly. And there's a lot of good energy. There's low turnover. I think schools typically have a lot of turnover. And teachers, we have low turnover. We're competing with the budget of a major district in a charter school, so the funding's a little bit different. We still have teachers that want to be here and are dedicated. So that means that we're doing something right. And I think it has to do with the relationship between the board and the operations, and allowing him to hire the right staff and the right team in order to keep the school focused towards its objective.
So how do you think this has impacted the people you serve? I think you were touching on that a bit, but how has this impacted the people you serve? The parents, the students, the broader community that you serve?
Well, the big picture is, I mean, a community with high functioning schools is a better off community. I mean, those MLS reports, what do they show first? Schools, school achievement, student achievement. I'm going to steal the line from Don Haddad, the superintendent of the St. Vrain Valley School Districts, but I mean, you know, a few mill levies and a few bond pale in comparison when your home values go up 100% in 5 years. So I'll just do some concrete ones. But again, it's just the schools are the lifeblood of a community.
Yeah.
I mean, sustainability, growth. When you hear about across the country or even in our own state of dead or stale communities, it's not a chicken or the egg, but I guarantee those are not successful schools probably, and they're probably not happy places. There might be a lot of reasons for that, but you need well-functioning schools to be a vibrant community.
People are coming here for this school. So there's a lot of secondary and tertiary effects of having a well-run school, from the economics to the housing to a place that's safe for children and parents and families. And so there's a lot of secondary effects and even tertiary effects of having a good school. And we're seeing it. I've talked to parents all the time, and they love coming here. And we have people that drive a half hour to come here. We have quite a few people that drive from the north and from the east to be here because they know it's a well-run school. Their kids are going to do well. It's not a particularly easy school. That's because they focus on very solid, well-rounded education. So it's not easy, and some people are afraid of that. But for the folks that come here, we look at the growth. And so the product for the students is great. What it does for the community, and I'll walk around the community and talk to people. My wife and I are involved with other boards and other things in the community, and people hear Twin Peaks Classical Academy because its performance is so good, and its reputation is good. And
So what do you look?
It's all related.
So what do you look forward to now? What do you look forward to now?
Always trying to figure out how we can do better. You know, my big concern is a transition. He's been mentoring his replacement, and she's going to do a great job. But there's always some concern, just because I know how well he's been handling things, and that we've had a great relationship, and we've learned as a board how to support him and the things that hurt his head with board members. So it's taken a couple years to work smoothly. So that transition is going to be hard, but irrespective of that, it's what we can do to expand our benefit and our worth as board, and then allow him to keep accomplishing those goals that they've been doing. And if they're doing that, we don't have to get involved. Is that fair?
Yeah, and so this is our fourth year with you, Ken, right? We're moving into our fourth year, I believe, with Aligned Influence. This year, I feel, is our best opportunity with something that I very strongly believe in, collective efficacy. John Hattie, one of the best well-known educational researchers on the planet, he does meta-analysis. His number one distinguishing feature in a successful school is the school has collective efficacy. They are all pointed in the same direction, they're rowing in the same direction, they know what they're doing. And right now, I feel that's the strongest it's been with myself and the board of directors, let alone the staff I lead. But you know, if I throw in our board of directors, there's 100 of adults, you know, with a very serious collective efficacy with what we want this school to be, the premier classical academy in Colorado. And we're all on the same sheet of music about that.
Exactly. Yep.
So what haven't I asked you that you think other charter schools should know?
Say that again.
What haven't I asked you that you think other charter schools? What do you think other charter schools need to hear? If you're way into your career, you're about ready to transition, what do you want other charter school leaders to know? What do you want other charter school board members to know? What haven't I asked you? What do you want to know?
From a board perspective, it's really about setting the tone of the board. We had some board members that were on the board for a year and a half. They didn't know what their role was. And so making sure that they understand, they get some leadership, some mentoring, some buy-in, so they understand what they can do positively, the outward looking. And then I think the board needs to think about the longevity of the board. Who's going to replace them? Start kind of grooming your replacement by talking to other parents that have the same goals, and it's very basic. The goals are to keep what we have here growing and successful and sustained in the future. So as a board, you really have to look down the road, and you need to have a team that you work together with. You have to work together and trust each other and communicate like any other relationship, quite frankly.
I back a little earlier to what Matt said. I think every school district, but specifically every charter school, needs to spend time and energy with deep philosophical thinking about how the school is governed. And there's almost 200 charter schools in the state of Colorado, and there are 6 in our district. And I can tell you, I would bet money a dysfunctional school, there is a dysfunctional board executive director relationship. And most successful schools probably have a strong relationship, which doesn't mean it's based on aligned influence, because it could be a little hero complex. You got a great board president or you got a great leader in spite of things, but spending the time and energy to think about governance and understanding it on a philosophical level before you can go to an operational level. Because if you don't buy into the philosophy, you can write manuals this high and people won't follow them. And I think one of my biggest lessons that I addressed it earlier, it's got to be, how do you keep that framework going on a cyclical nature? Every year we're going to probably have a new board member, Matt.
We have three positions to vote for next year.
Every year, we have elections every year with a rotating 3, 2, and 3. So every year there's going to be a new board member. We've been in, I beat the odds. School leaders don't last 9 years anymore. They usually 3 to 5 years. Odds are Alicia might last as long as I do, but she may go in 3 to 5 years. That is the average time for head of school, 3 to 5 years. So if you don't have all that work and grounding done, if the people leave, does the system fall apart? So think about the cyclical nature of training of new executives, new members of the leadership team, and board members.